Hey, everybody. PBSC podcast hosts Mark and Steve here with a special message about our revolutionary online recovery program for addict spouses and couples called Dare to Connect. Multiple times every week, we get messages from subscribers in the program. They're people just like you. They're trying to heal from the devastation of sex and porn addiction and betrayal trauma. And here's a few of our most recent submissions. Here's one from an addict in recovery. It says, D2C has principles that everyone should utilize regardless of their circumstances. It doesn't matter your coping mechanisms. It matters that you want to work towards genuine connection with your partner.
That's awesome. Another testimony from an addict continues on. My wife is just starting out in training as a licensed therapist. Dare to Connect has been far more useful to her than her degree.
Wow.
The way Mark and Steve apply what they've learned is always so redemptive. D2C has opened doors for my relationship that I thought would be shut forever. Mark and Steve are an incredible resource of information on the subject of sex addiction and betrayal trauma. We could not do this journey without their help.
Here's one from a partner who's been with us for nearly a year. I want you both to know that it is because of you guys and D2C that I'm able to be in the place that I am today. I will always be grateful to you both for your feedback and prompt replies to my questions. I can't even come close to putting it into words how valuable my time spent with y'all this past year has been to my life. Thank you for everything you taught me about betrayal trauma and boundaries and thinking errors and loving myself and making myself a priority and standing up for myself.
Love that submission. And then as we close out here today, guys, one more account from another addict in recovery. I wish I had a platform like this 14 years ago where I could have learned and done the hard work of recovery before I had done all this damage to myself and to my spouse. And to be candid with all of you, that's exactly why we created Dare to Connect. Mark and I found ourselves in that place. Messages like these and the others like them, they're what Dare to Connect really is all about, guys, and why Mark and I do what we do. Whether you're an addict or a partner of an addict, and no matter where you find yourself in the recovery process, Dare to Connect can take you to the next level. Don't wait another day to catapult your recovery forward. Today is your day for change. Visit us at daretoconnectnow.com to pick up your free 2-week trial of Dare to Connect today. Hey everybody, I'm Steve Moore.
And I'm Mark Castleman.
We know the pain and heartbreak of porn and sex addiction.
And we know the triumph of breaking completely free.
Every day, we help our clients find hope and healing.
Join us in the fight to take back your life, your marriage, and be stronger than ever.
This is the PBSC Squared podcast.
Hey, everybody. This is Mark Castleman and Steve Moore. We're coming at you with episode 339. Provocative content, social media, sexualized movies. Can they ever be, quote, safe, unquote, again in recovery?
All right, let's do it's a topic of debate. This is good. We like this. This is awesome.
Yes. Well, this one comes to us from a betrayed partner who's in the healing process, and she is still with her addict partner who's in recovery. And here's what she shares. She says, I was wondering if this is a topic you might be willing to discuss on your podcast from a clinical and recovery perspective. I'm glad she said that, because we're not going to go into a moral discussion today or we're not the moral police or trying to determine what you can watch and what you can't. She says, can we do this as clinicians and from recovery? I'm trying to better understand healthy recovery boundaries in the context of pornography addiction and compulsive sexual behavior. I understand that with many addictions, recovery often involves avoiding or completely removing things connected to the addictive behavior. For example, recovering alcoholics are often encouraged to avoid bars or drinking environments. From my understanding, a recovering alcoholic is generally advised not to drink again at all because there is such a high risk of reactivating the addiction cycle. And recovering drug addicts are often encouraged to avoid people, environments, or triggers associated with past drug use. Similarly, a recovering drug addict is generally advised not to return to using drugs because of the likelihood of relapse and returning to addictive behavior patterns. So I'm struggling to understand why pornography addiction or compulsive sexual behavior would be viewed differently. If someone has historically used pornography, sexualized movies, social media, etc., as part of their acting out cycle, escalation, or compulsive behavior, wouldn't continued exposure to those things risk reactivating the same neural pathways and addictive patterns? From a clinical and recovery perspective, how are situations like this typically viewed? Is recovery generally about learning moderation with previously sexualized or triggering content? Or is it more common or recommended to permanently remove or strongly limit exposure to things that were historically connected to the addictive cycle? My husband believes that after a certain amount of sobriety, he should be able to watch movies with nudity and sexual content again or use social media platforms normally. My concern is that these are things he previously used as a part of his acting out behavior. And I'm afraid that these could lead him back into full pornography use because he thinks they're harmless. I'm trying to understand this in a way that protects both his recovery and our relationship safety. And I would truly appreciate your perspective.
I I'm trying to think, and we this is episode, like Mark said, episode 339, so it's not like this podcast is new. Um, we have probably covered this at some
We
point in
have.
some form or fashion,
We have.
and it's definitely touched on in many episodes. But just really, I really appreciate I think the directness with the questions around the subtlety, I guess, is
Yes.
what comes to mind, right?
Yes.
Because real life, real recovery is not black and white. It's crazy, right? Um, wouldn't it be awesome if the world was just like black and white, good and evil, healthy, toxic? that would be that'd be wonderful. And there are things in life where that is the case, but when you're talking about recovery, when you're talking about origins of addiction and a path forward and rebuilding trust in a relationship and establishing and maintaining integrity and uh, defining sobriety. I mean, all of that, the list would just go on for 20 minutes about all the different pieces of this puzzle. It is gray. And it becomes grayer when you are talking about, as she indicated, sexual compulsion or addiction, which is what's referred to as a process addiction, similar to like food addiction, for example, where it's an addiction or compulsion that stems from a basic biological existing premise or push, as opposed to something that's what people think of as typical addictions, so drugs, alcohol, something that's external to the system that was artificially introduced. Um, and so it becomes even messier because the journey for, and we've said this before, if I'm working with a heroin addict, Mark and I have both worked in substance abuse, there is a black and white to that in most cases. With sobriety, first of all, heroin needle went in my arm, Steve. I relapsed. Heroin needle didn't go in my arm, Steve. I didn't relapse. There you go. Sober versus not, right? It's pretty simple. But when you're talking about sexuality, for example, did I go to fantasy or not? Was that fantasy quote unquote healthy or not? How long was I there? How far did I take that and manifest it into action, right? I mean, there are so many questions that attend to the safety in the coupleship, the integrity of the recovery of the individual. And so it's complicated.
Well,
Um,
and I think if we, as we open up this topic, yes, pornography addiction, sexual compulsion, there are some important ways that it is different from substance abuse. But I think we have to be very careful not to discount the fact that in many ways they are the same from a neuroscience standpoint. And over the last couple of decades, there have been some really competent and serious scientists who have done, for example, extensive brain scan work to look at the human brain under the influence of cocaine or heroin or other drugs, and compare those brain scans to an addict brain that's under the influence of sexual images, pornography, right, nudity, et cetera, et cetera. And the conclusions were very clear cut. The same regions of the brain that are activated in illicit drug use are the same regions in many ways that are activated when a pornography or sex addict is accessing that content. The brains look almost identical. And so you look at that. I remember years ago, I was working with a group that was doing some study about the neuroscience surrounding addiction. And one of the things that was very powerful were that a lot of the substance abusing individuals that we were treating would often talk about, for example, going to donate blood. And as soon as they would go to donate blood, when they would see the needle, just the needle sitting on the tray, ready to be used to withdraw the blood from them, they would immediately start going into an addiction memory loop where they would start to feel the pull, start to feel a lot of the feelings, and a lot of the same kinds of neurochemicals would start to release in their system just by the sight of a needle, right? Very powerful. Now, if you take those who have struggled with pornography addiction, sexual addiction, and compulsion, the same kind of process applies. If I see some provocative material, if I see, I'm going to be very personal with regard to me in my recovery. Like the heroin addict with the needle, if I see lingerie, if I see bikini models, if I see, my brain will absolutely react to that, and I can feel to this day the wiring will go in that direction if I am not very vigilant and watchful, carefully considering my intentions, carefully considering where I am at in life. How am I dealing with stress? How am I dealing with fear? How am I dealing with whatever? Those images, just like the sight of a needle for the heroin addict, operate very much the same way for the recovering porn and sex addict. Make no mistake. I think it's important to make sure we understand that neuroscience.
No, for sure. And there is that chemical, right, precedent where, like she rightly indicates this in there, right? There is anytime you're engaging with a behavior that is similar, or even more so with one's addictive profile, even when it's healthy, there are, of course, inherent risks to that.
Absolutely.
And again, this is another element of where this gets complicated because this partner doesn't elaborate on this, but everyone's addiction profile is so different. For example, the addict who has incorporated pornography in some form or fashion into the sexual relationship with his or her dedicated partner is going to be facing very different challenges in recovery than one who hasn't. Because as you might imagine, that becomes more complicated, right? When it comes to separating the toxic from the healthy. And so there is no one size fits all answer on today's podcast for this because of that inherent difference. But we did want to talk about some of the elements of this and try to answer her question from the best possible perspective that we can give.
Well, and
Go
Steve,
ahead,
as
Mark.
you're talking, I remember a story you told years ago. It's kind of the old, it's the old truckers story, right? A company's interviewing truckers to see who can drive this big rig along this really narrow canyon road and do it safely. And so guys are coming in to interview for the trucker's job. And all of them are saying, well, I can come within 12 inches of the edge of that cliff and not have the truck go. Well, I can come within 6 inches. Yeah, I had three in. Right, there's this big argument going on about how close they can come to the edge with not going over. And then one guy comes in and he says to the interviewer, I am going to stay as far away from that edge as I possibly can. And he got the job.
Yeah.
Right. That's a very, very good metaphor that you've used over the years with regard to us in recovery. You're going to go to all the edging behaviors and take it as close as you can get it. Or are you going to stay as far away from that edge as you can? Not just for your sake, but also for your partner's sake. Yeah.
Yeah. No, 100%. And again, our Mark and I, the PBSC podcast is all about individual recovery, of course, but it is about coupleships and healing relationships and things. And so this becomes even more complex because we're not just, for most of you listening today, there are probably some single addicts, for example, or single betrayed partners out there who patron the podcast, and we love and appreciate you. But we know that the majority are trying to invest and recover in relationships of one sort or another. And so if you're bringing that dynamic on board, while you can't and never should own one another's recovery, right? Because that's rule number one, the actions that we take and don't take do play a huge role into that. And they what might be helpful or healthy for one person could still be very damaging to the relationship,
That's a
right?
good point. Yeah.
Um,
Good point. I mean, and you and I've seen this over, I had some of these attitudes early on in my recovery. You and I've seen it many times where a guy starts to get some good sobriety. He starts to, get on a good, strong recovery path. And what's the first thing that they start to ask? When can I get back to normal life? When can I get back to
sure.
things the way they were? Right. And when their partner starts to express her pain and her fears and her concern, she can be labeled as controlling or paranoid or unreasonable when she's asking whether previously sexualized content should remain off limits or not, right? A betrayed partner that goes through complex trauma, gaslighting, integrity abuse, the guy living in a secret sexual basement for years or decades, for her to ask these kinds of questions is not controlling, paranoid, or unreasonable. And we really need to, as guys in recovery, we really need to lean in and sit with our partners on their side of these things when we start to ask these questions.
Yeah, 100%. Well, and so let's do just state some obvious things really quick. We won't spend much time on this, but just for sake of clarification, because we've, the partner who wrote us in, as well as what we've talked about here, um, it goes without saying, pornography addiction or sexual addiction in most cases doesn't carry a lot of the same physical consequences as other addictions that it's compared to in the submission, but it's by no means less serious, right? It's important that we honor and recognize the fact that, and in fact, I've heard this from both addicts and partners dealing with chemical addiction, because it's very common for those of you who don't know for there to be crossover into the sexual addiction realm with chemical addiction.
It's almost,
um,
yeah, from when we were both involved in drug and alcohol rehab clinics, I mean, I would say it was 90%
Yeah, at a clinic
plus.
that I worked at, that was an in-home. It was a inpatient facility for chemical addiction. A lot of the addicts there, kind of word went around that I was sort of the sex guy, as a certified sex addiction therapist. And guy after guy would come into our individual sessions, and inevitably they'd want to talk about that.
I had I had the exact same experience.
And so lots and lots of crossover, but it's no less serious. But we've heard from them, and as well as from partners, that actually this is harder. It's both more challenging to beat in terms of sobriety, but also more threatening to the relationship. Many partners, for example, are able to, not all, but many are able to, because the chemical addiction is like this outside issue, right? They're better able to more readily and quickly and consistently distance themselves from it, right? Like, this is you. This is you in the heroin. This is you in the whatever. But when we talk about sex, well, this is us. This is our coupleship, right? This is our intimacy. This is us choosing one another. This is our fidelity, right? It hits on all of those
Yeah,
things.
this is you comparing my body to the bodies of thousands of other women. This is
Correct.
significant.
So for many partners, if you ask them, they will say, "Yeah, I mean, obviously the chemical stuff will kill him, and that scares me. But this makes me feel exponentially more unsafe than the
Mhm,
other."
mhm.
So anyway, just want to make sure we kind of mention that as we go through here. And going back to Mark's point, right? This idea of I actually put a bullet point in our production notes here that I just want to kind of lead this out with because there is a mentality, and she talks about it in her submission, this partner, that, and for every addict listening, can I just tell you, this should be a red flag. I don't care who you are, why you're here, whatever. It is always dangerous to be operating in a recovery space with predetermined ideas of what the end result is going to be in terms of what my life post recovery, quote unquote, or in recovery or whatever is going to look like. Because you running your own show, I guarantee you, to one degree or another, is what got you in this mess in the first place. It did me. We were talking about this on Dare to Connect in the attic session on Monday, and
Yeah, we did.
I hit on this Steve plan for recovery works really well with a lot of my clients. Not to try to toot my own horn, but Mark and I, we're pretty good at what we do. We think we get that feedback from clients frequently. But I have example after example where the Steve plan sucks for Steve. I cannot run my own recovery exclusively, and I cannot assign expectations to how it should look or how it's going to play out or whatever. The minute I start going down that road, the minute I'm setting myself up for a variety of potential issues.
Well, I remember years ago, I was sitting in a group early in recovery, impressing everybody around the room with my impressive vocabulary of recovery jargon. And I remember the guy who was running the group was kind of a crusty old counselor, and he looked me straight in the eye and said, "Mark, let's just stop the BS. Your best thinking landed you in this chair."
Yeah,
Right? It's like, okay.
yeah, for sure. 100%.
Yeah, yeah. And I think, I think we need to be clear. Like, can you imagine, Steve, when you and I were in the drug and alcohol rehab clinics, looking at a guy in recovery and saying, the goal here for you is moderation. We want you
Mm,
to learn how to moderately use cocaine or heroin or meth, or how to just drink socially, but not take it too far. So this rehab facility is all about you learning to live in moderation.
mm.
How long do you think we would have kept our jobs?
That would not have lasted long for a lot of
No,
reasons.
no. And not just we would have been terminated, we would have been terminated for a good reason. It never works. I
Mm,
can't, for example, I had guys that were treated for alcoholism, and there were a few who said, you know what? I'm good. I've been sober for a year or two or three. I think I can go back to doing some light social drinking. Glass of wine at dinner, beer with the guys every once in a while. Do
mm.
you know how many of those turned out well? I can't think of a single one.
I would agree with you.
That's 20 plus years.
Yeah, I don't know any of those either, where a guy looked back and said, you know what, I'm so grateful. I'm so glad I did that.
Mm-mm.
No, 100%.
No, and
And
and and I was going to say, you so wisely said, this sexual addiction, pornography addiction, sexual compulsion, in many ways is more difficult to give away, to give up, because it's part of us. It's part of our biological makeup, right? It's very akin to food addiction. How do you stop eating, right?
I will I will never forget the day an addict came into the rehab center just mentioned I was running. He sat down and he said, "This is so much harder than kicking heroin."
Yep.
And he looked at me and he said, "It is like having a dealer in my pants all the
Ah,
time."
that is so. That is
He said
so.
it. He said it's like I'm walking around with an 8 ball, which is drug slang for those of you who don't know, for a measure of heroin. He said it's like I'm walking around with an 8 ball constantly.
Mm,
He put it very well, and it's
yeah.
true, 100%
Yeah.
true.
Yeah, and the trouble with it, you try to, this early on in recovery, that addict brain tries to convince you of moderation, but the problem is there's so many behaviors, so many environments, so many patterns, so many cues, so many images that are all around us at all times that can easily throw the brain back into that pattern. Like, I mean, like that. Before you know what's happened, boom, you're headed down that path. And so how do you try to do moderation with so many triggering cues and influences all around you all the time? Even cues in your own head
Mm,
with regard to fantasy or whatever, right? So there's a real danger in an addict saying, I should be able to handle fill in the blank. I should be able to handle blank now. Yeah, I can go back to watching movies that have nudity. Yeah, I've been in recovery now for a good while. I got some good sobriety. It's not going to be a problem. Right?
Mm.
I can go get engaged in social media. I can write whatever filling in the blank is. That is a dangerous attitude. And
I
I don't know that I can think of anybody that's been in recovery a long time with long sobriety and has really learned wisdom that would use those words. I should be able to, right, fill in the blank.
mm,
It's kind of a
yeah.
lack of respect for the power of addiction, frankly.
Well, and I don't disagree with that at all. And I mean, if we look at this through the lens, and I like what Mark was just saying a minute ago, right? Is moderation possible? I don't know, but it wouldn't be a recommended recovery path regardless. However, what is the solution then, right? Because this isn't drug and alcohol, like she mentioned. This isn't drugs and alcohol. This is not a chemical addiction. Healthy humanity is not meant to exist sans sexuality. It's just not. Contrary to what many of us were culturally taught, Judeo-Christian, wise taught, or in other circles, sex is not just this little element of our lives that you can just kind of take or leave. We are all inherently sexual beings. So what do we do with that? Right? Where
Yeah.
do we go with that? Because it isn't, not only is it a part of who we are, but it is a potentially tremendously connecting force. So
Hmm.
where do we go? Do we just look at couples and say, "Hey, man, hey, lady, I don't know what to tell you. Your husband's had a sex addiction, so I guess here we go. We're out for all time." I think that if I was to use an analogy, and this is not a perfect crossover, but as Mark was talking, let's say that a drug addict again had a situation where he had to take medications that were going to be inherently triggering to him because of his past for medical reasons. It wasn't optional. It wasn't like just a pain situation. It was these are necessary for life. What discussion would Mark or I have, or a therapist have with that person? This is probably the discussion that I would be having with them. It would look something like this. It comes down to careful examination of your intention. It comes down to you doing your very best preparation before you engage with that medication. And it comes down to you being transparent and accountable around your interaction with said medication so that you can do everything in your power to create safety for your partner, for you, and since this is a necessity, to create new bridges, new neural pathways, to use her line of thinking, right? That are healthy, that are sustainable, and that are workable. Now, again, this is different because sexuality, right, is not a requirement for sustaining life per se, but it is a critical part of an integrated lifestyle in the long term. And I would say the exact same thing. Intention, transparency, self examination, and there needs to be a balance to what we are doing as far as recovery goes and meeting our needs internally to mitigate any codependent elements around one's sexuality, thereby doing our best to inoculate against and mitigating the addiction so that
Right.
sex can become what it was always meant to be, which is one part of your relationship, right? And Dare to Connect, what do Mark and I talk about? 8 areas of intimacy, not one like most addicts think of maybe two on a good day. It's eight,
Yeah.
right?
It's eight.
And
Right.
so and so all those elements. Anyway, those are the elements I just wanted to
And
bring up,
we and
Mark,
we
in the
all, we will
discussion.
often share a phrase that the guys early in recovery absolutely detest. Sex is optional. What? Right.
Yeah, they're not a fan of that. They're not a fan of
Sex is
that.
optional because as I think about this, I'll tell you a question I probably would have been asking myself back in early recovery. Can I technically watch this movie and not act out because of that today? That would be a
Mm,
question. But what's the better question? Will watching this or participating in this protect my recovery and keep my integrity intact as well as my partner's safety and our relationships safety and intimacy? Will going and watching this or engaging in this or visiting this, will it do all those things or not?
yeah. Well, and the other piece to keep in mind with that as well is it going, what's going to be the root outcome and why do I want to engage in it?
That's a
Right?
great question. And this is where boy, you better check whether you're at the place in your recovery where you are actually self-honest,
Correct.
self-analytical, self-transparent. Because and I'm not saying I recommend this because I don't, but let's say that you decided there were certain kinds of movies or social media, whatever, that you felt that it was safe to interact with. You had better put your transparency at the absolute top of your commitments to both be honest with yourself about the experience and with your partner. Here's exactly what was going through my head during that. Here's what I thought about after. Here's how it impacted me. If you're not going to come to this with absolute transparency and honesty at all costs, then there's no way that you would even make the attempt with any of this.
Mm.
Hey, everybody, PBSC podcast hosts Mark and Steve here with a special message about our revolutionary online recovery program for addict spouses and couples called Dare to Connect. Multiple times every week, we get messages from subscribers in the program. They're people just like you. They're trying to heal from the devastation of sex and porn addiction and betrayal trauma. And here's a few of our most recent submissions. Here's one from an addict in recovery. It says, D2C has principles that everyone should utilize regardless of their circumstances. It doesn't matter your coping mechanisms. It matters that you want to work towards genuine connection with your partner.
That's awesome. Another testimony from an addict continues on. My wife is just starting out in training as a licensed therapist. Dare to Connect has been far more useful to her than her degree.
Wow.
The way Mark and Steve apply what they've learned is always so redemptive. D2C has opened doors for my relationship that I thought would be shut forever. Mark and Steve are an incredible resource of information on the subject of sex addiction and betrayal trauma. We could not do this journey without their help.
Here's one from a partner who's been with us for nearly a year. I want you both to know that it is because of you guys and D2C that I'm able to be in the place that I am today. I will always be grateful to you both for your feedback and prompt replies to my questions. I can't even come close to putting it into words how valuable my time spent with y'all this past year has been to my life. Thank you for everything you taught me about betrayal trauma and boundaries and thinking errors and loving myself and making myself a priority and standing up for myself.
Love that. Love that submission. And then as we close out here today, guys, one more account from another addict in recovery. I wish I had a platform like this 14 years ago where I could have learned and done the hard work of recovery before I had done all this damage to myself and to my spouse. And to be candid with all of you, that's exactly why we created Dare to Connect. Mark and I found ourselves in that place. Messages like these and the others like them, they're what Dare to Connect really is all about, guys, and why Mark and I do what we do. Whether you're an addict or a partner of an addict, and no matter where you find yourself in the recovery process, Dare to Connect can take you to the next level. Don't wait another day to catapult your recovery forward. Today is your day for change. Visit us at daretoconnectnow.com to pick up your free 2-week trial of Dare to Connect today. Yeah, no, I absolutely agree with that, right? So much of this comes back to intention, but also, as Mark rightly indicated, the capacity to be honest with self. Right now in Dare to Connect, and we hope that you will all come join us on the Dare to Connect program. We're offering a 2-week free trial for that at daretoconnectnow.com. Come join us and take recovery to the next level. If you like what you're hearing here on the podcast, you'll love that program. But we just recently started a few weeks back a module on internal family systems. We're in the middle of it right now, where for the last few weeks, we've been looking at both partners as well as addicts, quote unquote, protector parts. The parts of us that operate in the background that seek to safeguard us, that try to create and meet our needs while in a protected and healthy way based on the traumas or the other fractures, quote unquote, that we've experienced as people. So if I was to put that in that terminology, what are the parts operating in the background right now? Okay, you've heard me say on this podcast many times, great, I want to have sex. Awesome. Why? There are lots of reasons why a person wants to have sex.
Yeah.
And some of them could be really healthy. Some of them might be really toxic. The same reasons that are really healthy for one person may be really toxic for another.
Yeah. Before
Right?
engaging sexually, I mean, even with my partner or my spouse, What's my stress level today?
Mm-hmm.
How am I dealing with my fears? What about my sense of entitlement? Am I feeling like I'm acting in any secretive ways today? I could come up with 20 questions that you would ask to do a self assessment before you go into that place.
Yeah, 100%. And so you can see again how important it is to, because there's many ways this comes back to what we've talked about before when we've talked about, you know, healthy sexuality in the relationship, right? There isn't a list of behaviors that we can give you on this podcast today that we can say, okay, for everyone here, these are healthy and these are not. It's impossible, right? It's impossible because so much of the gray, again, that we started this with, depends on intention, depends on where I'm at in my recovery, depends on how I'm trending today. This question should go way beyond can I watch movies or not, you know, of a certain genre. Although you should have those ask those questions, and I think that there are certain boundaries that we've outlined on this podcast before, where Mark or I would say, under any circumstance, these are
Oh,
problematic.
yeah, we don't want to indicate in this podcast we're talking everything's gray. That's not true.
No, but there is
There's
so
plenty of
much
black
to
and
the
white.
middle,
Yeah,
right?
there is middle stuff every day. Yeah.
For example, and honestly, trying to operate in that black and white leaves you vulnerable to problems. I have gone into movies before that have no nudity or sex, but because of my addiction background, because of where I'm at emotionally that day, because I'm where I'm at with connection with my wife or otherwise, that movie was probably more triggering than nudity would have been,
Mm, good
right?
point.
That's just one example that I'm
Yeah,
giving.
that's just one example. Yeah.
Right. And then you can just see where that could trend or go. So again, so much of this comes back to impact on coupleship, intention behind it. What does this mean for me? What does this mean for you? You know, the list
Yeah,
just goes on.
where am I at with my self-care, with my mindset,
Yes.
with my resiliency? The other
Like,
thing is,
can I say one more
oh
thing?
yes, please.
Sex, for example, right? Is se- a lot of people who are listening to this might figure, well, sex with my partner is always healthy. Is it? Because I can tell you, as an addict in his own longer term recovery, I'm the one who said no more than once to my wife. And it's not because I'm not attracted to her, nor is it because I'm not interested in sex. Clearly, I'm very interested in sex if you look at my history as a person. Clearly, it has everything to do with how is this going to impact me right now? What headspace am I really in? Am I acting in my integrity and aligning with my own personal self, or would engaging in sex right now be hindering me in that
Yeah.
process?
Am I fully present in this moment? Is it all about me and my partner? Or are there other things encroaching on this experience?
Correct.
And all of that. The other thing that occurred to me, I hope that this guy is not trying to map all this by himself. We should never try to just to decide what kind of boundaries should exist for us with regard to these kinds of questions by being our own sounding board, right? Our best thinking got us here.
Mm-hmm.
Quote, best thinking. I hope he's bouncing all of this off of his support group, a sponsor in 12 step, a therapist, right? His partner. This does not need to be decisions made in his own head or declarations that he, pounds his fist on the table and says, this is how it is. He better get a whole bunch of input from people that are a lot farther down the track than he is.
For
Right?
sure.
Because if he just rattles this around in his own head, he's going to be headed for some tough stuff and tough stuff for his partner. Right? And here's the thing. See, I used to think that any boundaries around what's this question she sent in, any boundaries around those were what? Taking away my freedom, punishing me for my past behaviors, right? Encroaching on Mark's life again so that he doesn't get to call the shots.
Mm.
And I had to learn that it was none of those things. Boundaries. I love boundaries today. Boundaries protect my sobriety. Boundaries are about my emotional safety. Boundaries are all about continuing to rebuild precious trust with my partner. Have everything to do with my long-term path of freedom in my life. I cannot imagine living without boundaries today. No way.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
how that is viewed is very important.
Oh, it's huge, right? So those are, I mean, really, if we're talking about the nuts and bolts here as we're wrapping up, right? That is what this is. But taking this back to again, if we look at this from a internal parts perspective and what this partner is looking for, right? One of the things that we feel strongly she's looking for, I mean, because there's the question that she sent us, right? Which is, hey, is this healthy, right? Hey, can this be navigated with moderation or whatever? But what's the question behind the question, or what's the frustration, or what's the fear?
That is the question, right?
Right. And we don't want to mind read her, but we work with partners all the time. And we know what we're going to say next as we wrap up is going to resonate with many of you. It's what are you really wanting underneath questions like that when we ask those? Because figuring out what those parts are, those quote unquote protectors, again, get your butts and dare to connect now, or dare to connect right now, because this module is really cool as we look at self intimacy with self as a predicate to intimacy with a partner. What am I really wanting? What's really driving these things that are showing up externally for me? And one of the things that would come up for virtually every partner that Mark and I work with one on one with questions like this would be, I'm looking for him to, we use the term on here oftentimes, I'm looking for him to lead out. I'm looking for him to be proactive. I'm looking for him to choose me. Going back to
Yeah.
what Mark said at the beginning of the session, I'm looking to him to not be saying, hey, babe, great news. I drove this close to the edge today. And look what I got away with.
Hmm.
And, or this is how close I hope to drive to the edge today or next week. And look how awesome it'll be when I do it. She's looking for a partner who's able to say, I recognize the damage, I recognize the cost, I recognize what I have sacrificed and put on the line in the name of seeking pleasure and escape in the past, and I'm choosing you, and I'm choosing me, and I'm choosing us differently now. I hug the other side of the cliff so close, I spend my day rubbing the paint off on the left side on the
That's
wall,
a great analogy.
right?
Because, I love the word that you used just a second ago, leadership. So virtually every betrayed partner we work with says, I wish he would take charge. I wish he would lead out. Can he decide to be the one who's proactively identifying risky content? Can he be the one that's putting boundaries on himself about limiting access? Well, can he come to me about discussing concerns and choosing safety? Why do I have to be the policewoman on this?
Yeah.
And whenever a betrayed partner is forced into policewoman role, what does that say? I'm not important to him. He's not willing to sacrifice. He's not willing to proactively take the reins on this. It's up to me, which means he doesn't consider me adequately,
Mm.
right? Safety builds. How many guys say, I want to rebuild trust with her? I want to rebuild a relationship. Okay. Then how about saying, you know what, sweetheart, your fears make sense given my history. And I want to proactively put boundaries in place that help keep me safe and you safe and us safe. Right?
I think a guy who has successfully really tasted of the benefits of recovery the way that we have and the way that our clients have, if you really are connected with that and you are feeling that and you really are at that point, a lot of this proactivity piece takes care of itself, not because that magically makes a guy awesome, but because the internal motivation becomes much more self manifesting.
Yeah, yeah.
Because why? Because obviously I want to protect my partner, and of course we want to do that, and that's really valiant, like Mark is saying. But to every addict who's listening, just one more point: what about you? Don't you matter? Are you a 1950s beater truck that you just you know drag around the farm? That if you drive it off the cliff, well, who gives a shit? Or are you a Maserati? Because you've discovered your potential and your worth. And why in the world would I keep driving that thing with half a tire hanging off? That's insane.
Well, and I started to ask myself questions like, why do I want to go to this movie that's got nudity in the first place? What exactly is that going to do for me?
Sure.
Why is that going to make a difference in my life? Why is that so important?
How am I going to be enlightened
Yeah,
through
how
this
am I
experience?
going to come out of that experience a better person, more in tune with my higher authentic, better core true self? Will it better me? I started to ask those questions. Going on the social media, why does it matter so much to some part of me? What is that about? I can't go without it. Why is that? These are important questions.
Absolutely. There's so much more we could say about this, guys, but it is a half-hour podcast, so we love and appreciate you. Thank you for being here. If you would like to take it beyond 30 minutes a week, and we strongly suggest that you do, when you get done binging the episodes, if you feel good things, if you walk out of these listening to these podcasts feeling more connected with the desire for recovery and change, desiring more safety, desiring more integrity, then you're going to love Dare to Connect. And if you like that in a package that includes Mark's wisdom, Steve's wit is I'm being playing pretty fast and loose there, mixed with a little bit of healthy swearing and occasional cursing, then you will love Dare to Connect. If you like that level of rawness and realness, come join us at daretoconnectnow.com. Grab a free 2-week trial, and we hope that you'll come join and stay with us. For those who are looking to send submissions into the podcast, you are, of course, still welcome to do that by going to the same website, daretoconnectnow.com. Click at the PBC podcast link up at the top with the logo, and that will take you to a contact form where you can do that.
Yeah, we're about 5 or 6 weeks out at this point. So yeah, just know. Well, thanks for being here through a tough topic, a controversial topic in the world today. We hope that the meaning of this, our true intent for each of you, we love and care about you. We want you to have the most joyful, connected, fulfilling lives possible. We hope that this has all been received on that intention. And we'll look forward to picking up things with you in the next episode.
Have a great day, guys.
Everything expressed on the PBSC podcast are the opinions of the hosts and the participants and is for informational and educational purposes only. This podcast should not be considered mental health therapy or as a substitute thereof. It is strongly recommended that you seek out the clinical guidance of an individual qualified mental health professional. If you're experiencing thoughts of suicide, self-harm, or a desire to harm others, please dial 911 or go to your nearest emergency room.